Welcome back, everybody. We are in week 6. I hope you enjoyed weeks 4 and 5, where we talked about personnel security and then went on to do a little exercise that kind of incorporated both physical and personnel security. So we reinforced what we learned up front, and then we added in the next phase. The one thing I want you to remember about that exercise that we did is that that is the work of private security people. Most people think about, a mass workplace shooting, something of that magnitude, that is a police matter. And that's true while it's going on, right? The investigation of, what exactly happened. Yes, police will do that investigation. However, making sure that doesn't happen in the first place and then going in after the event and doing a full investigation of how it occurred and what you need to change so that it doesn't occur a second time. That is the work of private security people. That takes a lot longer, quite frankly, than the police part of this, where they would come in once the first shot is fired, right? Private security people have been hopefully working for years trying to prevent something like this. And in some of the cases we saw, they didn't do a very good job, and that's okay. We can't all be perfect, and sometimes it takes, unfortunately, an event like some of the ones we studied to really get people to look at their practices across the board. And hopefully people did that and do that every time there's an event like this. I know that whenever there was an event in the world that involved a workplace violence event or some big workplace event, I would always have my teams go out and say, okay, could this happen to us? I think that's a good practice, and it worked well for me. I didn't have any major workplace events, like mass shootings and mass violence and those kinds of things in a 40-year career. Now, that could very well be I'm just lucky, and I'm okay with that. But generally speaking, private security people will go in and do that triage afterwards and see what needs to be done to their own facilities to make things right. So that type of work that you did is very much in line with what private security professionals do. So I want you to remember that as we move forward. Now, we talked about our security triad, and you've heard me mention that before. And we started with, as I said, physical security devices, and then personnel security, protecting people from people, and doing the non-device type things like background checks and making sure people are who they say they are and monitoring their behavior to protect people from people. And our third leg of the triad is informational security. Now, many of you are cybersecurity majors or computer science with a cybersecurity minor, and you say, okay, well, we're going to talk about cybersecurity. And yeah, we are just a very little bit, because I don't teach cybersecurity. But when we talk about informational security, I want you to understand that the AL on there is really what makes a difference between that and what a cybersecurity person might do. As always, we'll start with a definition, and there are many definitions in this particular unit. You may want to print out the slides to use during the quiz. It'll make things easier. But informational security is the protection of data, intellectual content, trade secrets, personally identifiable information, and proprietary information. All of those have individual nuances as to what they might be. But again, why do we say informational? Why not just information security? And there's a big reason and a big difference that our author of our textbook brings about, and I've talked to him about it, and it makes perfect sense to me, actually. And that is that the addition of that AL kind of adds a multifaceted, larger, bigger picture view of information security. So when we say, what direction did someone go, we're looking for a very specific thing, right? Left, right, north, south, a direction. When we talk about something being directional, that kind of gives us the whole nother feel to the word. Something is directionally correct if you're trying to get a higher number and you're heading toward that higher number, like with stock, right? Your stock would be directionally correct if it gets higher if you own that stock. Your blood pressure would be directionally correct if it's going lower normally, because most people in America have high blood pressure. We bring that on ourselves. And so directional kind of gives a more of an abstract feel to it. And when I look at it, I say information is a thing. You can generally either put your eyes or your hands or you can in some way see information. But informational is really just an all-encompassing concept of the types of things that we're going to protect. And some of them are hard paper. Some of them are words that are spoken, and some of them are bits and bytes and just vapor of some kind. But we encompass all of those things when we talk about informational security. But people will still ask, don't cybersecurity experts handle all this stuff, right? If we're talking about protection of data, then cybersecurity people take care of that. Well, yeah, they do when that data is in bits and bytes, when that data is on networks, when it's in electronic form. But cybersecurity people aren't generally watching what's being said over the telephone when somebody in the next cubicle is listening in on the call. Or generally speaking, when somebody just taps into the phone, although many of our phone systems now, in fact, most of them in business are network-based, right? They're voice over IP. So there is some monitoring there, but generally speaking, we don't record the phone calls. So who's monitoring what's being said over the phone? What information is leaking through voice? Same is true with communication security in general with writing, right? When we write an email, that's great. You can monitor email, and cybersecurity people, forensics people generally might go in and look at somebody's internet history or their email to see what they've released of company information. But if I write it down and put it in a notebook and walk out with it, it's not going to get caught by a cybersecurity person, but it is still an information leak that could do amazing damage to a company. Now, document storage and classification, definitely something that we want to talk about because not all documents have the same importance, obviously. And then protection of personally identifiable information. I'm sure you've all heard that term before, but I think when we put it into context, you'll understand that just bits and pieces of information that really don't mean anything on their own, when put together, can certainly build a dossier and put a person's identity at jeopardy. So let's go with some of those definitions. Well, cybersecurity, right? It's the art and practice of protecting networks, devices, and data from unauthorized access or criminal use. That comes from our folks at CISA with Department of Homeland Security. And that's pretty encompassing when it comes to the way we transmit information, probably the most nowadays. So it is really a big part of it. So I don't try to minimize the cybersecurity effect on informational security. It is a huge part of it. But it is the protection of logical assets. And by that, I mean it's in a digitized form, as opposed to physical assets. And many records, many important records, much important information is in a physical asset, right? I can do my taxes, and in fact, I do my taxes on a computer, right? Generally do my own. And then I download it to a thumb drive. Why? Because I want to have a copy that I can take with me to an accountant who checks my work, right? Generally speaking, I do my own, then the accountant goes in and cleans it up, and I save a couple $1,000s in having my taxes done when I do it that way, as opposed to having somebody do them because I have complicated taxes. As a partial retiree, things get complicated, and I have some side business stuff. But generally speaking, that thumb drive, once I've downloaded the file on there, that thumb drive still has that information on it. Now, I may have password protected it, which I do, but most people don't, and I think we know that. And who's handling that physical asset, that actual thumb drive? And the answer is, it's me, and it's my responsibility. And the cybersecurity person can't help me one iota when I do that. So while cybersecurity people are primarily focused on data transmitted and stored in electronic formats, that electronic format can be carried away in different forms that take it away from the network and take it away from the watchful eye of that cybersecurity person. And those protections are now at the behest of the person who is hand carrying that information, even if it's in a digital form. So remember, cybersecurity people, once you're talking about logical assets and it's going back and forth over data lines, yep, it definitely is yours, and we trust that you're going to do a great job in protecting us from bad guys. But at some point, that data gets into some form, and that form may go off the network and out of your purview, and that's that multifaceted view of information security. We just don't have just the things that cybersecurity people can control and watch over and protect. So the next part of informational security is really communication security. And we'll define that as the prevention of unauthorized access to telecommunications traffic or to any written information that is transmitted or transferred. Now, think about phone taps, listening devices. So I used to do security protection for shareholder meetings. Shareholder meetings are required of any public company, and the company has to annually have a meeting of shareholders where anyone who has even one share of stock is invited to address the board of directors and the management team and ask questions. Now, not everybody gets to ask a question. These things do have time limits, but generally speaking, if you own a share of stock, you can't be prevented from attending a shareholders meeting. Now, before a shareholders meeting, generally a board of directors will get together. Now, if you're going to invite all of your shareholders and you are a company like Apple Computer or NVIDIA, or in my case, it was Pfizer Pharmaceuticals, we had literally millions of shareholders. Now, most of them would not come, or they were holding shares in a mutual fund and just the broker that had that mutual fund would send a representative. But we would still get a whole lot of people who would come in. And the board of directors would meet at a hotel, use a boardroom in a hotel, and then have the meeting in a banquet room in a hotel so it could hold the maybe 1,000 people who would show up. And we would get between 300, 400 people and 1,000 that would show up for these meetings. So they wanted to be prepared. So they would meet and they would discuss business. Now, they're going into a hotel that they've never been into before, and someone on the security team had to go into that boardroom with someone with counterintelligence equipment and sweep for listening devices. You did not want them discussing company business that could impact the business itself or be used for insider trading in a room where there might be listening devices. So communication security is a big part of informational security. What's really interesting, and people forget about it, is interoffice mail security. Even at the university, you see these interoffice mail envelopes, right? The one that I carry into the classroom that I drop the little tokens out of, right? The manila envelopes that I can send a note to the president of the university, and I write out my note, and I stick it in an envelope, and I address it to the president, and I put it in interoffice mail. Someone picks it up from my office, it goes to a interoffice sorting place, and they take it to the president's house. I could say anything in that note. I could have information about students in that note. I could have information about my own identity that I don't want necessarily shared. But who's handling the security of those envelopes? I don't really even know who picks that envelope up. I put it into a mail slot out in our office suite, and mysteriously when I come back, it's gone. And mysteriously, the person I sent it to calls me the next couple of days to say, I got your note and let's discuss it. Or they send me back a note and it mysteriously appears in my office. But I honestly do not know about the security of that and whether it's being read somewhere. They're not sealed like a U.S. postal note. So think about the types of things in communications that we use to communicate, not just phones and phone taps, but we talk amongst ourselves. We talk with people in the next cubicle. Someone could be listening to you when you're discussing something, sitting in the dining hall tonight, having your dinner. You're sitting there talking to your friend about something personal, and the person at the next table can hear you talk. Communication security is important in that if you're discussing things that could cause you harm. Now, when we talk about what can we do, well, with phone lines, they can be encrypted so that if somebody taps it, if they don't have the right encryption, they're not going to get the signal. They're just going to get a buzz. Right? Access control. We want to make sure that only people who belong in a room go in a room. So after we did that counterintelligence sweep of the boardroom where the board of directors would meet, the room would be sealed, and we controlled access until they went in and they were done, and then we'd open the room back up again. It also, by the way, included not just sweeping for bugs, but going up into the ceiling and looking for any listening devices or recording devices that may not be picked up on a bug sweep, right? If they're self-contained, they may not get picked up. That's all part of a counterintelligence sweep. But there are tools you can use for communication security. It is actually a fairly lucrative business if anybody's really into that kind of thing. But communication security is something that's certainly outside the realm of cybersecurity, if indeed it's just people talking somewhere where people can hear. One of the things we kind of don't think about anymore, because we're so digitized, because we're using our laptops and our cell phones for almost everything we do, is the fact that we still generate a lot of documentation. And document storage and control, we're talking about the procedures, processes, and policies used to protect information in hard copy form. lots of things have to be printed out. When you electronically sign a loan document, someone normally will copy that down, that electronic copy, and it gets stored somewhere. Because in discovery, if you were to default on that loan, someone may ask for a hard copy form of that. Now, DocuSign has been used for a while now. I don't know if most companies download a copy of a DocuSign document. I know that some do, for a fact. If you sign something in DocuSign, you're putting an electronic signature on there, but they still download a hard copy of that to keep as a backup copy. Now, sometimes those documents can be very sensitive, and would you want anyone and their brother to get to it? If you're going through all of the cybersecurity protections, protecting that document while it's in electronic form to make sure nobody can get to it, right? DocuSign, you've got passwords, and you click on things, and you're making sure that nobody can get to that information, and then we print out a copy and we leave it sitting on a desk out in an open office area. What have we really done? We've basically negated all of that electronic protections that we put in place. So in order to best protect documents, the first thing we need to do is to classify them. Now, I'd ask you if you get a second to open up your wallet or your pocketbook or whatever, wherever you carry your documents, right? And I would venture to say in just about every one of these, there is a driver's license, and I'm assuming most of you drive. There is probably a medical insurance card if you're still on somebody's insurance or if you have your own. I would say there is probably a credit card or a debit card of some kind in there. Whether it has any money attached to it is a whole nother question, but you probably have one in there. And then you probably have some form of identification from a club or an organization that you might belong to. You might have some receipts for something that you purchased. Could have a couple of phone numbers written down on slips of paper. Could have written, people write down passwords and put them sometimes in there, let's face it, so they don't forget them. And each one of those documents has different value to you. If you were to lose your driver's license, if you were to misplace it, you opened up your wallet and your driver's license was not there, you took it out somewhere and you showed it, you bought some beer somewhere and you had to show your driver's license and you must have dropped it, put it back in, and it's now gone. That was at the Giant Eagle in your hometown, 100 miles away. You dropped it probably, and that thing is long gone. You're going to be in a bit of a panic, but you also know that that has a picture on it to identify you, and you know that you need to go to the Department of Motor Vehicles and to apply for a duplicate driver's license, and you will walk out of there with one in your hands, and it's going to cost you X amount of dollars to get one, and you'll take better care of it next time. If you drop your debit card, and you can't find it, you know that you can get another one, but you also know that someone could potentially use it, especially for those who are stupid enough to write their PIN number on it or put the PIN number on a piece of paper somewhere in there and that's missing too. So we classify our own documents in our mind. In this particular case, your driver's license is very important, but you know you can get another one. And you know it's pretty hard for somebody to use your driver's license for ID because your picture's on there. Whereas with that debit card or credit card, oftentimes people don't ask for ID when you use a credit card. Somebody could be ringing up that bill. You immediately go into a higher panic. You've classified your documents. Unfortunately, we don't always in business classify our documents properly, and therefore we treat them all the same. So sitting on someone's desk could be some interoffice memos about the company Christmas party coming up. And also your loan document that you signed because that business happens to be a loan clearinghouse and you signed it and it has all of your personal information on it. So businesses need to classify information properly. What's important, what's not important, and protect it in that way. So some of the things they can do is put a classification on and then have document control and physical access control to those documents. When we get to the highest level of documents, in the U.S. government, in fact, we have something called a SCIF, a sensitive compartmented, let me get it right here, sensitive compartmented information facility. For some reason, I have trouble remembering that one. But a SCIF is where you would go in to read classified documents. So you need to have access to the SCIF, right? You need to be cleared. That would be through an ID or an access control system like a card reader system perhaps, or more likely through facial recognition and some other types of ID, someone physically IDing you when you go in. You then need to have, there's document control, so you ask for a document, and based on your credentials that are registered with the SCIF, you may or may not have access to that level of document. We can give you document A, but you can't get document B. You're not cleared for that document. So document control, we have them classified correctly. And then inside of a SCIF and inside of any place you keep sensitive documents in hard copy, you should have copying and scanning controls. No cell phones. Cell phones have cameras and scanners. So no scanners, no copiers, no cell phones, no thumb drives, no way for you to, no fax machines obviously in the room. There is no way for you to make a copy. You can perhaps memorize it. You've got a photographic memory, power to you. But you're not going to copy and transmit that document from inside the SCIF. Document storage and control is something that is sorely missing from many private companies that hold your information. But we are getting better at it. The more there are incidents of personally identifiable information, which we're going to talk in a minute here, being taken and used against people, the more pressure on private corporations to provide document storage and control. So what is personally identifiable information, PII? And it's a term that I'm hoping that many of you in your majors have heard before, but if not, it's a term that you will definitely hear again. And it is any representation of information that permits the identity of an individual to whom the information applies to be reasonably inferred by either direct or indirect means. Now, that's a mouthful. And basically what it means is that there are bits and pieces of information about you that if put together, and I will use this as the litmus test for the most part, could be put together to fill out and potentially get a credit card in your name. I think that's probably the litmus test that works best for me in my mind. Feel free to use it. There are more nuances to it than that, but bits and pieces of information. I can't necessarily just use your name and go apply for a credit card. I can't just have a social security number and not a name attached to it and apply either. So your social security number, if you wrote it down on a piece of paper, and so did a million other, or 1,000 other people at the university, dropped it in a hat, and I pulled out, and all I had was that string of 9 numbers. I can't use that to apply for a credit card because I could put it down, but then it's going to say, what's your name, what's your date of birth? Well, I don't have that information. I don't have it tagged to a name. Just your name. It's not going to help me. Just a date of birth. But if I put those 3 things together, I have enough personally identifiable information to take your identity. I can reasonably infer, and in this case directly, name, social security, date of birth. I can definitely infer your identity from that. And if I can infer your identity, I can generally steal your identity in some way. That's how we like to define personally identifiable information. Now, here are a couple of examples, but this is not an exhaustive list. You see here social security numbers, driver's license numbers, passport numbers. A taxpayer identification number generally for each of us would be our social security number, but if you own a business and you may not be a U.S. citizen that has a social security number, in fact, you could have a taxpayer identification number. But things like a patient identification number, okay, your bank account number or credit card number. If I have your credit card number and I've tried to buy something, it's going to also ask me for a name, and it's going to ask me for normally an address, a billing address, right? If I try to buy something with a credit card online, let's just use that as an example. It's going to say, enter your credit card number. It's going to ask for my 3-digit or 4-digit PIN, depending if I'm using a Visa MasterCard with 3 digits or American Express with 4. And it's going to ask for the name and the billing address. Any one of those pieces of information by itself is not going to allow me to buy something on that credit card. But if indeed I have all of those, then indeed I could use that credit card to buy something online very successfully and very quickly, and probably before you ever knew it was gone. So just having one of these things generally is not enough to hurt you. But in PII, when you put things together, you put certain elements together, and you could indeed take that person's identity. And again, that's the litmus test we're looking for, is that you can infer who that person is. And if you can infer it, then you can repeat it and try to become that person. That's where you're going to lose your identity, is when they have several pieces of information. So how does this hurt you? Well, obviously, you don't want your identity stolen. So what you need to do is to, sorry about that, I got to pop up there. What you need to do is understand who has this information. You're obviously going to protect your Social Security number. If I asked any of you for your Social Security number, one or two of you might give it to me thinking, okay, well, he needs it for something with registration or something. Well, we don't, right? I wouldn't. If I asked for your, your credit card number, you probably wouldn't give it to me. But you've given it to a number of people, probably the bookstore. And what do they do with it? How do they taking care of it? Did they take all of their credit card receipts from the last time people went in and bought books and downloaded it all into a spreadsheet and said, here's Brian's name and here's Brian's account number, his credit card number that he used, and this is how much he spent, so they can do their books, and they printed that into a big, long, hard copy, and that happens to be sitting on the manager's desk? I doubt it. But do we know? We don't. So the big problem is not necessarily you protecting your information. It is that you must release everything on this list. You have to release to somebody at some point. Medical information, your health insurance information, right? Your credit card numbers, personal address, all of that information. The university has a lot of this information, and how they're protecting it is the problem of informational security outside, in many cases, the realm of the cybersecurity expert. So if the cybersecurity team is not able to protect this information when it's not in that network, right? When it's not in bits and bytes, when it's not in a digital format, when it's not logical information, it's now hard copied, it's printed, it's being talked about, it's being copied on a copy machine, it's on a thumb drive. They can't be held responsible for that. It is outside the purview of cybersecurity. So who's doing it? Well, it could be the IT department in some cases, right? They could be, when you have thumb drives, they could say, okay, well, you bring your thumb drive to us and we hold on to it for you. I don't know, right? Could be the security department, meaning the physical security department, meaning the private security department that is taking care of setting up a SCIF and protecting the hard copy documents. In many cases, it's the human resources department, because the things that are on that personally identifiable information list, I would say of that list that I just showed, 90% of them are things that your HR person, if you're working somewhere, has access to. They certainly have access to your Social Security number because they have to pay your Social Security, your name, your home address. They have information to your medical insurance because normally you'll get your medical insurance from your employer, right? So the things that are on that list, they may be the ones protecting it. But it might be no one. And that's the hard truth, is that when we talk about information security these days, we consider cybersecurity to be the end-all, not understanding that much of this information is in formats that a cybersecurity person simply cannot, by virtue of the tools they use and their skill set, protect. So how are we going to close this vulnerability? Because it's a problem and we've got to close it. So there's a really simple answer to this question that gets more complex when you dig into it. And that is convergence. Convergence is the integration of the cumulative security resources of an organization in order to deliver enterprise-wide benefits through enhanced risk mitigation, increased operational effectiveness and efficiency, and cost savings. Dr. Tyson sure did say a mouthful there. In simple terms, it's cooperation between the physical security people, the cybersecurity people, the people in communications that hook up the telephones, the people in HR that hold much of the information on our own employees. When everyone works together, then we have a better chance of protecting that information holistically, that informational security concept of all-encompassing and multifaceted. Now, convergence is a great idea. So let's talk about convergence and what it really means. And I think the best example of convergence is our military. So the U.S. Army primarily handles land combat. Now, the Army has helicopters, as we know. The Army has boats. they use for river fighting and things like that in some places. But generally speaking, the Army, when you consider the U.S. Army, it's land combat. And the Navy, who also has fighters and things like that, right? But primarily handles sea combat. I think we can pretty much say that. And the Air Force then primarily handles air combat, right? Air Force does have ground protection forces that protect air bases so they can get into a ground war, and just like the Army can. But generally speaking, land, sea, and air, Army, Navy, Air Force. The Marines are a bit of a hybrid, but Marines primarily handle amphibious combat. The beaches, where the land meets the sea, is generally the purview of the Marine Corps. That was the purpose of the Marine Corps originally anyway. So when we think about it, when they all converge, we can cover all the Earth's surfaces for defense, right? So that's why they need to work together. If the Army just went to try to fight on land and didn't have air support, there'd be a problem. If the Air Force didn't have the Army protecting that air base from an attack, there'd be a problem as well. If there's so many different combinations. I think you know where I'm going here, right? They need to work together, because if they didn't, there'd be chaos. So let's take that military concept now to the business world. The physical security team, and by that I mean the non-cyber, right? The side of the fence that I worked on and continue to work in, handles physical and personnel security almost primarily. The IT security team, or the cybersecurity team, primarily handles cybersecurity and communications on electronic devices. I, as a physical security person, am not going to try to jump in and put up firewalls to protect information any more than a cybersecurity person is going to come and put up barriers and proper lights and proper delay devices to deny and detect people trying to attack a facility, right? The physical security team primarily sets policy around physical access control, and the IT security team primarily handles system access control. I say who can get into a building, or who can get into a SCIF, or who can get to hard copy information, and the IT security people tell us who can sign in, who can get a password, who can have access to different systems. Now, HR at a company primarily handles the collection of personally identifiable information, because generally, unless your business is collecting that, right? You could be a healthcare business and you're collecting PII on all kinds of people who come in, a large hospital system perhaps. Generally speaking, most businesses, the PII that they work in is their own employees. So HR has a dog in that fight, as well as everyone else. And sensitive documents other than PII, well, operations. Whatever your business does, that's who's collecting that information as part of their business function, and they handle the collection and storage of those documents. So again, if you work for a school system, then the school system is collecting the data on the students, their grades, their aptitude tests, their money for tuition if they go to private school, those kind of things. The operations people are collecting all of that. And so they get it, and then somebody has to protect it. So if everybody can work together to protect information, then we're in great shape. Because if we didn't, just like if the 4 branches, 5 technically, right, or even 6, right, if you talk Space Force and Coast Guard, right, if they didn't work together, there'd be chaos, because everybody needs to work together to do this. This is really simple, sort of. So in order to have a convergent security department, you need the concept of convergence is based on mutual respect and cooperation, right? The single mission of protecting people, property, resources, information, and reputation falls to the people in cybersecurity, the people in HR, the people in operations, the people in physical and personnel security. No one function is more important than the other in the context of a comprehensive security program, right? If everyone understands what the vulnerabilities and the threats and the assets are, and everybody understands they need to do their part in their specialty to protect them, then we have a comprehensive security program that doesn't rely on one or the other where the ball can get dropped. Yet the concept of convergence has been out there for the last 20 years at least, where mostly physical and cybersecurity work together to protect information holistically in all its forms. And it's been debunked by both cybersecurity and and traditional security people over that same 20 years where they either say it won't work or they won't put it into practice. Why is that? Generally speaking, physical security has been an independent entity for a very long time, right? Physical security it dates back thousands of years, right? If we want to go back to Fred, right, protecting himself from a dinosaur, it's been around forever. And cybersecurity has been around for probably the last 25, 30 years. I mean, it certainly was out there before, but not so widespread and not in the private and business world. Well, the folks who are in the physical security side, right, the traditional security side, see cybersecurity as a threat. There's no question about that. I worked in this field a long time, and that is the general feeling. At the same time, I think most cybersecurity people do not understand enough about private security and homeland security to say that it is a skill set. They have this feeling that anybody can do that job. It is far harder to be, to get the technical skills to be a cybersecurity person than it is to be a traditional security person. And to some extent in the starting of a career, that may be true. You definitely need to have more of a skill set to start a career in cybersecurity than you need to start a career in traditional security. I will say, though, as someone who's been in the field for a very long time, to be good at the traditional security, you need to continually work on that skill set because it is a constant changing landscape, just as it is in cybersecurity, and they even out. Both sides then look at fear of replacement or redundancy. When somebody comes into an organization and says, I'm your new head of security, I'm going to handle both cybersecurity and traditional security. We're going to look at it holistically, and we're going to converge the departments. That has always been seen in our fields as code for job loss. Now, you are all in a position now where you're either going into, and there are a few exceptions in the classroom, but generally speaking, you're either in a computer science / cybersecurity world, or you are in a homeland / corporate security world. And you will encounter this. There is no question. When you rise to a management level position, someone will ask about converged security. Is it time for us to join cybersecurity and traditional security into a single organizational structure so that we can protect information and people in a holistic way? We know that that's the proper thing to do. That holistic, where everybody has that job. We all know that chaos won't come and get us, right? Just like the military when we're covering everything. Yet we make that decision consciously not to do it in the field. So there is one tactic that you can use and you should use, and that is a convergence light model. Right? Integrate security committees and councils, right? Have frequent discussions on projects that affect both sides of the house, right? The cybersecurity side, if you will, and the traditional security side. Have policy liaisons. When one side's going to have a policy, let the other side take a look at it, right? Ensure the policies capture risks to both sides of the house. Again, you're trying to put together a holistic, converged model without job loss and fear of people thinking that someone is, coming to get their job, because that is really what's holding this back from industry. And then share the physical security device reports and digital forensic information investigations, right? What types of threats are you encountering? I will tell you that I have very seldom, I had a very good relationship with our cybersecurity people at Pfizer when I was there for many years, and actually had a digital forensics person that I worked with almost exclusively in investigations, and we shared everything. When he needed to know, well, how often is this person actually coming to work? I'm looking up, there's some activity that they've got going here, but I don't see them hitting the network from work very often. They're hitting it from home. Are they actually coming in the office? Are they trying to hide their activity from others in the office by doing it at home? What's the deal here? I would share the reports of when they came to work. I had that information. Very simple stuff, right? Card access reports. Digital forensic information. I've got somebody who is, they would call and say, I've got somebody who appears to be using the network to steal, right? They're using the network. They're using whatever, I would then go through and look at other things like company credit cards, which I was responsible for, to see if a thief is a thief is a thief. Are they stealing in other places? That convergence light, that level of cooperation, is something that you should strive for when you get into that first job. And so the preaching is coming to an end, but I think this is hugely important for people who are going into either field, the Homeland corporate side, traditional security side, or the electronic side. Combined security awareness in convergence creates an awareness about everything that's going on around you. And people start to think security in terms of protecting themselves from all different threats, be they electronic threats or be they physical threats. You will certainly protect your reputational assets when you have a holistic security approach. If something goes wrong, if you have a data leak, right? Sometimes a big data loss. If you have a major incident like the one we studied last week, right? Those workplace shootings. Someone will ask you about your security programs. And if you're able to say that we have structured our programs for this, so that everything works together, everybody's aware of it, everybody has a job to do, they did it, but you know what? Sometimes things just, you can't be ready for everything. Sometimes things just happen. We saw that with many of those workplace shootings, and the same is true on the cybersecurity side. You know, as many protections as you put in, somebody's always out there trying to write something to get around it. But your reputation will suffer if it looks like you don't have a strong program. A converged program always looks like a stronger program. It will help your reputation. It will also identify synergies, right? Are we protecting the data center physically as well as we are protecting the information in it, right? Those types of things. You will eliminate redundant efforts. I have been in data centers before where the IT people put up a camera system that is not tied in with the security camera system for the facility where they're sitting. And they then could not take advantage of the analytics or the things we were putting into the analytics to look for that would alert us to anomalies. So you will eliminate redundancies when you have a converged program. And you will definitely identify new risks if you share information with anybody across your organization, and especially if they're in the same type of business you are, i.e. security business. So from an informational security perspective, sharing is caring. And I encourage each of you when you get into your first job to, if you're a cybersecurity person or a computer science type person of any kind, a data person, go visit your traditional security person, understand who they are, share information with them, and ask them to share information with you. You will find that you will excel in your job far better than if you try to go it alone. So in exchange for listening to me lecture you in a brutal lecture format this week, we have a quiz. The quiz is out. It is due on Sunday at 11:59 p.m. Be sure you submit the quiz. I have had a number of students in the past and this semester as well. They do the quiz and then they get to the end of it. They don't hit the submit in the end, right? They don't hit that final button. You should see your score immediately when you hit that. If you don't see your score, then it hasn't been submitted, so make sure you do that, okay? It's a simple thing. But next week when we meet, we're going to talk about private security as a business. And with that, have a great week, stay healthy, and I will see you in week 7.